Welcome to the MacMillan Report. I'm Marilyn Wilkes, your host, and our guest is John Githongo, Kenya's most prominent anti-corruption activist and the CEO of INUKA Kenya Trust, an NGO that works to increase citizen empowerment and good governance. He is visiting Yale this week and will give the annual Coca-Cola World Fund at Yale lecture on the topic of corruption, security, and development. Mr. Githongo is the chairman of the Africa Institute for Governing with Integrity, board member of the Africa Center for Open Governance, and a commissioner of the Independent Commission on Aid Impact of the British government. In 2011, he was selected as one of the 100 most influential Africans by New African magazine and one of the world's top 100 global thinkers by Foreign Policy magazine. From 2003 to 2004, Mr. Githongo served as Permanent Secretary for Governance and Ethics in the post-transition government of Kenya's third president, Mwai Kibaki. However, he began to expose corruption within the administration that appointed him. Fearing for his safety, he fled Kenya and spent time in Britain. He returned to Kenya in 2008. Today, we'll talk with Mr. Githongo about his anti-corruption work in Kenya. Welcome, Mr. Githongo.
Thank you very much.
6 months or so ago, you did an interview with The Guardian in which you said that Kenya was at a tipping point due to terrorist threats, a decrease in tourism revenues, and a lack of confidence in the government. Where is Kenya today on that scale?
We remain on that tipping point. On the one hand, we have, on the face of it, an economy that is growing rapidly. Mm-hmm. We have, however, despite that, the economic growth is unequal, mm-hmm. But that's not just a Kenyan trend, it's a global trend of tremendous inequality. We are then confronted with a world-class enemy in the form of Al-Shabaab, which mm-hmm. has managed to transform itself from being a basically Somalia-based jihadist group into an Al-Qaeda franchise in the Horn of Africa, uh-huh. Challenging our security services in a manner that we had not anticipated and bringing the war to us in Kenya in a manner that has had a huge impact on our tourism industry, for starters, mm-hmm. which has a very severe knock-on effect on our general economic condition.
Mm-hmm. And what about corruption? What role is that playing in Kenya today?
I mean, corruption plays an extremely prominent role. Mm-hmm. The effectiveness, for example, of your security services to prosecute their mandate against a group like Al-Shabaab or Al-Qaeda is very much dependent on their ability to operate on the ground without taking bribes, without turning away from corruption that is taking place on the ground. Nothing facilitates the movement of terrorists freely in a country than if you have a corrupt immigration system, police system, intelligence system. And those institutions routinely come up tops as the most corrupt in our society, which makes security, maintaining security, a challenge. Especially when confronted with a group like Al-Shabaab in Kenya.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think needs to happen to stem that corruption?
We've been fighting corruption for a long time, mm-hmm. in Kenya.
Both in business and at the government level?
The fight against corruption in Kenya has been seen very much as something that the government needs to do. Mm-hmm. Increasingly, people recognize that it has to be done by ordinary individuals as well, to do what they can to fight corruption, but also in the business community. It's become clear, and I don't think this is something which is limited only to Kenya, but I think is a global phenomenon, that the services sector, the banks, the legal firms, real estate companies that are involved in mortgages, etc., are essential to the architecture of grand corruption around the world. And increasingly, corruption operates as networks. So the same network that facilitates terrorism finance, moves illicit funds that have come from corruption, that moves the funds that have come from environmental corruption, which is a big problem in our part of the world with the poaching of elephants and rhinos, human trafficking, mainly the trafficking of girls, drug trafficking proceeds. The networks that are used to move these resources increasingly overlap. And this has been especially the trend since around 2003 around the world. And this money goes through the formal banking system using lawyer client accounts, etc. So the business and private sector, especially the service sector, has a huge role to play in helping to stamp out corruption.
And how could they play a role? What do they need to do?
One of the initiatives that the G7 started last year was to push for a register of beneficial interests of companies in offshore centers, so that people can't just set up basically shell companies and park huge sums of money in those shell companies, which deprives governments of taxes, but also allows a lot of very dirty money to be mixed in with clean money, and is laundered through that kind of system, and it makes the financing of terrorism and other illegal activities much easier. So I think just increasing transparency in that sector is, I think, critically important. It's something which the global community has recognized as a challenge, and the G7 has taken it on, and I think it's important. As we sit here, I'm sure you've read about they're calling them the Swiss leaks in Europe, and which sort of is a very good sort of snapshot into the way the resources of all of kings, ministers, drug dealers, ministers.
They're all hiding this money.
It's all in the same, parked in the same place. And I think that tells us a very important story about what needs to be done to fight corruption. That snapshot of transparency teaches us a lot about what some of the initiatives that can be taken to deal with the scourge of corruption. It shouldn't be possible for a drug dealer to park their money in a respectable bank and then walk in and walk out with a big wad of cash.
Sure. What about China? What kind of a role is China playing in Kenya today? Is it helping it? Is it hurting it?
China is a partner of rapidly growing importance to Kenya. In terms of trade, in terms of infrastructure, the economic relationship is significant and growing strong, and Kenya is a hub for China to penetrate other parts of the region. So it's a very important partner
so Kenya's benefiting.
Kenya is benefiting, and I think that one would like to think that the kind of energy and focus that the Chinese government has concentrated on fighting corruption in China, within the bureaucracy in China, is something that they can share with us, so that so far the Chinese policy has been to engage in Africa and basically to ask no questions and not to comment on the internal affairs of the countries where they're working. However, it would be helpful for us also to share their experiences. If they have recognized the danger that corruption poses to the whole of the Communist Party in power, and the kind of detrimental effect it has on forging a harmonious society in their own country. It would be important for us to gain from that, because thus far, I mean, China is not a democracy. So the concern has been that the authoritarian model that comes from China is increasingly attractive across some parts of Africa, and that may take us backwards. We've been democratizing really since the end of the Cold War steadily. It's been fits and starts and has had some challenges, but it's something that Africans are quite committed to and believe in.
So today, you would call Kenya a democracy?
I would call Kenya a fledgling democracy. Kenya is not going to become another United States or Sweden or Norway. it's going to become its own kind of democracy. I think that's where we are, of defining a democracy that works for a diversity of peoples, institutions that address issues that are particular to our part of the world.
For instance, like what particular in what way?
Well, first of all, we are beginning to appreciate, and this is something I'll talk about later, but we're beginning to appreciate the resilience of identity politics around the world. That people, when they go to the voting booth, don't always vote for the best person because they have laid out the best policies. But identity issues, somebody's religion, somebody's ethnic group, somebody's other identity-related affiliations, remain extremely powerful in determining the choices people make vis-a-vis leadership in their own parts of the world. And we're seeing a sweep of that across the Middle East, for example, with this very strong identity of Muslims who want to identify themselves as that and project the alienation that has come as a result of that in various ways, some of them extremely barbaric and detrimental to world peace. So I think acknowledging that, affirming the fact that identity politics plays a very significant role in the choices that people make is important, and with that you can reshape your democracy accordingly. So say in Kenya and other countries where this kind of politics is important, one can argue that first past the post politics doesn't really work. Perhaps proportional representation would be better. We've tried devolution, electronic voting. There are different innovations that can be adopted in countries where these kind of issues are prominent in society.
There is a high percentage of youth in Kenya, and I'm wondering if you can speak to, there's a tie between a high percentage of youth and how terrorism groups recruit. Is that an issue in Kenya? Are terrorism groups recruiting the youth of Kenya? And then I'd like you to talk a little bit about your NGO, INUKA, and what that's doing to help the citizens of Kenya.
I think that terrorist groups around the world recruit the young, those who have aspirations, those who feel marginalized, those who feel alienated from the center, those who feel left out. They're easy to recruit, and there's a dynamism to the way that terrorists are recruiting these days, using the internet and social media platforms in ways that had not been anticipated. When 9/11 happened, we had never thought that a group like ISIS would be using the internet the way it is to recruit young men, even in Europe and other developed countries, to go and fight in Syria. So I think it's an issue not only in our part of the world, but across the planet.
Certainly.
And the flip side of that is that we have in a country like Kenya, despite the challenges, the majority of the population, the vast majority of the population, is below the age of 34, so it's young, hugely aspirational, globalized with mobile phones and the internet, etc. So they have those aspirations that are very similar to their counterparts in the US and other developed parts of the world. And they're the healthiest, best educated, most globalized demographic in the history of Africa. And so they are the future. They're going to determine the face of Africa in the years to come. And so, we work as an organization in various counties in Kenya, really from the grassroots up, trying to engage people on their own terms, focusing very much on forging a sense of nationhood in conditions where nationhood is sometimes tenuous, where it's been rendered tenuous by poor politics, political polarization caused by elections. Elections as a process or an event in certain contexts don't always result in a deepening of democracy and creating for a harmonious society. They can help divide a society if mismanaged. So mitigating that by working with youth groups directly, especially in the more marginalized areas. Our focus, as much as possible, is to engage with them on social media, on this platform that is being used for negative purposes. We do that in a very strong way. But then through livelihoods projects that, it's water, education, health, there's a saying, you enter through the stomach, you enter into somebody's governance realm. It's easy to hold a workshop and talk to people about good governance, but if you really want to get their attention, understand the issues that are really pressing them in terms of livelihoods, whether it's health, education, food, start there, and then you'll have an audience to listen to you or discuss with you and share with you on the governance challenges that they're facing. So that's very much our approach.
So what are your hopes for Kenya in the near term and then say 10 years down the road?
In the near term, my hopes for Kenya is that we have implemented a new constitution in 2010, which is a very progressive constitution. It has its strengths and its weaknesses. It was, like all constitutions, it was negotiated after the post-election violence that took place in Kenya in 2008. It requires some changes to make it work better for the people of Kenya, given our own current realities, so that those changes can take place in a peaceful atmosphere and that we can go into just the next election, which is only a couple of years away, with an electoral commission that people have faith in, and so that we don't have violence around that election. So that's the very immediate short term, that we're able to have another election that people find credible and is peaceful. That would be very critical.
And do you think that can actually happen? I mean, can the government ensure that it is free of violence? I mean, is there confidence in the government?
Currently, I would say that there isn't the confidence that the government can actually pull off an election. If it was tomorrow, it can't pull off an election that would carry the majority of the Kenyan people. So significant changes need to be made vis-a-vis the whole machinery of carrying out an election to gain the confidence of the majority of the population that we can go to the ballot box, vote, and the result is something that is acceptable to the majority of the people. That's the current challenge that is facing the entire leadership, not only the government, but the opposition and civil society and media as well, to come up with a system that is credible to all Kenyans. That, with the pressure that is being placed on the country because of the security challenges that we face, from what I describe as a world-class enemy. When you talk about Al-Shabaab, Al-Qaeda, it's an enemy that even the U.S. has grappled with for a long time.
And then for the long term, your
hope? For the long term, Kenya is a uniquely placed country on that side of, on the eastern side of Africa. It's a very dynamic country. In terms of natural resources, we're well endowed. Most importantly, we're very well endowed in terms of just human resource. And we'd like to see ourselves as, we are the largest economy on the eastern side of Africa. We'd like to see ourselves playing a leadership role that in the process of moving Kenya moving Africa towards deeper integration, economically, politically, and socially. Dream of a time when we are already in a regional integration process in the eastern side of Africa, and 10 years from now, I would like to see an East Africa with no borders between Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi. We're heading there slowly, and political and economic and social integration.
Very good. Well, hopefully that will come to pass.
It will indeed.
Thank you so much for being here with us today and sharing some of your work.
Thank you very much.
For more information about Mr. Githongo, please visit our website at yale.edu/MacMillan Report. Be sure to join us again for another episode of the MacMillan Report, made possible through funding from the Whitney and Betty MacMillan Center for International and Area Studies at Yale. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.